Welcome to another episode of App Stories. Today's episode is brought to you by Sentry. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing terrific today. We've got a fun show in store for listeners today because I thought we could talk about the apps that we use to make ourselves more productive, and also the ones that we've decided don't.
Before we do that,
Yeah.
because the things I'm going to talk about here are very much related to how I've been working this summer for the iOS and iPadOS review. And I just wanted to start sort of teasing this project a little bit because it's gonna come soon. I have shared nothing about the review so far on social media this year.
That's true.
I have done something completely different from previous years that I don't want to share because it needs to be a surprise. Very few people know about this. I believe it's like 5 people, and that's including Sylvia and you. 6 people, actually. 6 people know in total.
6 or 7 people.
6 or 7 people. Yeah, it's actually 6 or 7 depending if you count me, I guess. So It is 6 or 7 people that know about this. It's very different from previous years. It's gonna be divisive in the sense that some people are gonna love it, some people are gonna hate it, I guess. But I don't care because I love it. So that's gonna happen, and my review is almost finished. And in addition to that, there's gonna be other extra perks, as always, that I also don't want to spoil because I'm also trying to do something that I've never done before. And in addition to my review, we're gonna try and have the full slate of operating system reviews on Mac Stories in the first week of the OS releases. That means iOS, iPadOS, of course, together, macOS from you, John, and we're also going to have, fingers crossed, watchOS and visionOS for the first time. So it's gonna be a busy week at Mac Stories whenever that happens. And like I said, I just wanted to start teasing the fact that people should mentally prepare for some new things that are never tried before.
Right. Well, you got to shake things up every once in a while. And, you've had a very successful formula for many years now, but it needs to, we need to try new things. And I think what you've got in store for people is really terrific.
Look, we said at the beginning of the year, it's time to get weird, right? That's something we said. I am doing it. I am.
You are.
In a good way.
Put your money where your mouth is, as they say.
Yes. So, now we can get on with the show because I do want to talk about how I stayed organized and productive.
All right. Well, that's good. You know what I want to do? I want to put some context around this, at least for the things that I want to talk about. You can define productivity however you'd like, Federico. You don't have to be bound by my rules. But when I went into this, I was thinking about I don't want to talk to people about my favorite email app because I don't like any email app. I want to talk about the apps that actually help me do more during the week. And that doesn't mean it's not necessarily task managers or email clients or, whatever, databases, whatever it happens to be. It's the apps that I actually find that aren't really necessarily... They're ancillary in some way to the core work, but they actually help me get things done more efficiently than alternative apps. So that's kind of where I was coming at it from.
Right. Looking at this list, I realized that over time, the ways that each of us are productive have diverged in some considerable ways, and much to my surprise, they converge into with the Read Later app, which I was not expecting.
That is unusual.
So I want to start with the obvious, with the note taking, and I want you to tell me what you're doing with Obsidian.
Sure. So Obsidian serves multiple purposes in my day-to-day life. And sure, it's where I write articles, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. It is critical to my productivity in that you and I have a lot of projects going on at any one time. I'm got my finger in the club, the site, the podcasts, advertising. We've started up our YouTube channel, all kinds of different things. And so I need to kind of keep track of all of that. And we're working with more people now. So I use Obsidian just to take notes and keep track of everything that we're working on, what I'm responsible for, what I need to follow up with people about, and all those sorts of things. And it's just a simple way to do it. So one of the things I do is I create this weekly note. I don't do like this daily note thing that a lot of people do and is built into Obsidian itself. I do create, though, a template, which is just very simple. It's just every week, it's called like week, it's like the name of the file is like 2024-WK and then the number of the week. This week is week 35 of the year. We're getting up there in terms of numbers of weeks. And most of what that note has, it has some links at the top to some general notes about various projects, but it mostly is just the days of the week and then the weekend. And it supplements what I do with the task manager in that it's a place for me to kind of remind myself of the top handful of things that must get done that day, as well as take notes. For instance, as you and I talk over iMessage and you suggest something that you ask me to do, I'll put it down there. And that way I'll make sure I don't lose it in the thread of iMessage. Or maybe I'm writing a longer email to somebody about something and I want to draft it outside of mail where I can kind of think about it a little bit and have reference to my other notes. I'll write it in Obsidian. So it becomes kind of an inbox and scratch pad and organization tool all wrapped into one. And I guess beyond things like this week note, I have lots of templates for some of the standard articles we put on the site that I can generate and then fill out. I do outlines of kind of bigger projects. And then once in a while, I just sit down and I try to plan out what's next for everything we work on. And I often will have for each big category, like I have one that's for Mac Stories and marketing. And when I have an idea about how we could market something better and promote something better, I'll put it in there. And then every now and then I'll go in and organize it. And then, often that will lead to a conversation with you about something. There's ones for things like that. There's ones for things like podcasts, for YouTube, for the website, all that kind of stuff. And that's how I keep track of what's there, both kind of in the near term, like the very week that I'm working on, but also the longer term projects that we work on.
Yeah, I have taken a completely different approach. I have decided that I work better with Obsidian as just my text editor for the things that I write, and everything else goes into Apple Notes. And I've sort of become an Apple Notes power user, primarily because I really, really love the quick note feature.
It is good.
Allows me to save any kind of data, not just text, but like rich links, images, videos, files, whatever, from anywhere on the iPhone and on the iPad. And it's especially great on the iPad because of the way that it pops in from the corner of the display. And I've also understood about myself that I don't like folder structures. If I start putting things into folders, that's where things go to die. I don't like opening folders. I don't like navigating folders. I forget about them. Yeah. So over the past several months, sort of doing this sort of analysis of myself, so to speak, I've realized I prefer to have things in just a couple of locations and use a tagging system to organize them.
Okay, and I was going to say, you just have one long list of notes in Apple Notes then?
Yeah, I do, and I actually am going to talk about the same approach for reminders in a few minutes. But I use tags to then be able to, for me, it's always been about like more than folders. It's always been about sorting and filters. So I really want to be able to see things that are not tagged, for example, or things that have obviously like a specific tag, like iOS review is a tag that I use in Apple Notes. Or, for example, I want to be able to see notes that I have recently created or recently modified. And that for me is a much more practical and looser way of organizing notes, that because it's got a loose structure, it means I am constantly bumping into my notes.
Right.
instead of forgetting about them. Like that was the problem that I was having with the folders. Like it's really easy to come up with a really precise, really nice looking on paper folder structure and then forgetting about that. Like and that was my problem. And so I very much prefer being able to see multiple things at once, and then when I want to filter those using tags, then remembering, oh, I had this note in this subfolder that I totally ignored. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I get that. Because I've definitely run into that problem myself in the past. One way I try to combat that is with tagging within Obsidian itself. So I can find things that way as well. And also keeping my folder structure very shallow, usually just 2 levels, so that things are not buried very deeply into a folder structure. And that way I can kind of get back to them. A couple of things, I guess 2 things I would point out that are different in the way that we're doing this stuff, which is for my review, it is all in Obsidian and the notes are in there too and all the research. So for instance, what I've been doing all week as I write is that I have a macOS 15 Sequoia review folder. And in it, there's a research subfolder and a review subfolder. And so what I've been doing all week is in one pane, I will have the review that I'm writing, the section that I'm writing, and in the other pane, I'll have the notes that I took earlier in the summer. And so I can kind of use it as a checklist to make sure I'm covering everything that I need to cover. And I use that split pane two up view a lot for that kind of stuff. It's a view that I use over and over again, oftentimes in this same kind of scenario where I have notes, but I also have something else I'm working on, whether it's an article or something else. And then the other thing I would mention is that I have notes in my kind of up and comers list in for the show today, because I have too found that quick notes have become more and more important to me. What I've been doing though is I will take quick notes, but then I will have a task in things that will remind me every so often to check my quick notes, and then take those quick notes and turn them into whatever they're going to be, a note somewhere else or a task or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I literally have the same repeating reminder to review my quick notes inbox, because it's basically my inbox. And the idea, like quick notes, is also based on the same idea that I shared before. Like it's a loose inbox in the sense that it's not just text, it's not just images, it's all kinds of media. And that's increasingly the way I like to work. Like maybe it's a rich link to a Mastodon post or a Threads post, or maybe it's a screenshot, or maybe it's a PDF, or maybe it's some text. And now in iOS 18, I can even highlight that text. And obviously, I'm gonna go in more detail in the making of story for the iOS review. But this year, I stuck with this concept. I did all my writing in Obsidian, and there's no other place I can write and edit Markdown with plugins and my custom shortcodes than Obsidian. It needs to be Obsidian. But all the research, all the notes, all the chapter organization, that was done with Apple Notes. And I mostly wrote the review with split view, so not Stage Manager, split view, old school on the iPad Pro with Obsidian on one side, notes on the other. And man, that was pure bliss. Like split view and slide over are still so good on iPadOS, it's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, that's how I wrote everything, organized everything with backlinks in Apple Notes. I had a table of contents in Apple Notes, and I was writing in Obsidian and checking my references and checking my sources in Apple Notes side by side. It was great. And again, that allowed me to have different kinds of research material in Apple Notes. Like some chapters, I had a variety of screenshots, links, quoted text, PDF attachments with highlights. Like it was very much a multimedia setup, which you can do in Obsidian. But you can do it. But I just prefer how it's natively integrated in Apple Notes. The fact that Quick Notes sync in the background, I can capture something on my phone and sit down on my desk 2 hours later and know that the Quick Note is going to be there, because Apple Notes has background sync privileges that third-party apps don't have. And so, I'm going to write about this. I'm going to show screenshots for this entire setup, but I had a really good time.
That sounds great. that background syncing is really something that needs to be opened up to third parties, because that has become like a stumbling block for so many apps for me, and why I've gravitated towards web apps. I mean, I think if Apple wants to really focus on why people do or don't use native apps, they ought to think long and hard about background sync, because having some kind of web syncing service is one of the ways you can get around the fact that native apps don't have sync capabilities. But a lot of native apps, don't build in that kind of web server infrastructure, so they can't do that, and then it becomes an impediment to using them if you use multiple devices.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Sentry. Sentry are the folks who help you avoid your mobile app being the one that gets deleted next. From getting deep context into crashes to seeing full insights on performance issues, Sentry is here to make sure your code doesn't suck. Fix what's broken faster and keep your app running smoothly with application monitoring built for mobile developers. Look, I know that a lot of developers out there listen to App Stories, and this is the kind of service that's perfect, because not only is it used by some of the biggest names in tech, and you can use it too, but the thing is that you don't want to frustrate your users. I have it happen all the time. I open up an app, I tap on something, nothing happens. I try again, nothing happens again. I force quit the app. I reopen the app takes a long time to load. I get back in, I tap on something, it still doesn't work. Because I test apps, I'm usually pretty patient with that, but most people aren't. And the problem is that you do that to someone and they are going to delete your app. They're just going to give up and go somewhere else. With Sentry, you can avoid that, because you can monitor crashes and get insights into how your app is performing, and adapt and change with both the way your users are using your app and rooting out those bugs and getting them fixed quickly. Keep your mobile users happy. The great news is Sentry is totally free to use, so there's no reason not to check it out. Go to Sentry.io, that's Sentry.io, to get started for free, and mention that you heard about them from App Stories. That's Sentry.io, and say you heard about them from App Stories. Our thanks to Sentry for their support of the show.
Do you want to talk about task management next?
Yeah, we can. One of the things that I'm worried about right now, I guess, is that I'm starting to creep into multiple inbox territory, where I've got quick notes, and I've got the inbox and things, and I've got other apps where I dump links and all sorts of things. But things continues to be the task manager that I'm using, and I've never been entirely happy with the way it handles certain things. I mean, the repeating tasks is probably the biggest of them all. It's a little inflexible in places, but it's also very flexible in others. And it's really the shortcuts integration and things like the support for markdown notes in the notes fields and things like that has kept me with it. But it also frustrates me when I can't attach an image to a task, for instance. That sort of thing would be really nice. And I don't know. I mean, so I guess it's that flexibility, and it's also the quick capture that really keeps me using it, because especially on the Mac, you have the hotkey ability to both just create a task right there, and it has most of the details that you would ever want to add to a task available from that quick entry feature. Or you could even do another hotkey and bring in things like URLs from Safari, or a link to a mail message if you're in the Apple Mail app. And so that, to me, is probably the most valuable thing about a task manager, is be able to get things into it quickly and easily. And that's why I've stuck with it.
It's a beautiful app. It's got great shortcuts integration. Ironically, that was also the reason why I stopped using it at the beginning of the summer.
Yeah, I know.
Just after WWDC, I immediately installed iOS and iPadOS and everything, because I need to get started using the OSs as quickly as possible. And all of my things, automations and shortcuts broke because of some shortcuts bugs in the first few betas. And I thought, well, I rely on these automations and I need a task manager. So I thought, well, I can probably keep using all these shortcuts if all I do is take out the things actions and swap them with reminders actions. And that worked because of the way that my shortcuts were organized. It was really like remove one, put in the other, and it kept working thanks to variables, thanks to parameters and all that sort of stuff. And so I thought, well, temporarily, I can use reminders and I'll switch back to things eventually. And the more I kept using reminders, the more I fell in love with it and sort of had the same realization as with notes, that I was using reminders with a bunch of lists, right? Like regular lists. And I was wasting a lot of time thinking, oh, okay, where does a task go? Does it go into this list or this other list? And also like defining where a reminder should go into a list is not great in the Reminders app on any platform, because Apple seems to really be pushing the idea of using tags to organize your reminders. There's a hashtag icon in the Reminders toolbar. There's never been, and there still isn't, a list icon to quickly assign a list. If you want to assign a list to reminder, you need to open the inspector with the info button and then go into another screen to pick the list you want to use. Whereas with tags, you can just press a keyboard shortcut and start typing and accept the hashtag suggestion. So I started using reminders, and obviously the shortcuts integration is great. Just almost as great as things, but very much passable for me. Sync is amazing, just like Apple Notes, because it syncs in the background. And something that I've come to rely upon is I can capture a reminder on my Apple Watch with a due date, and moments later it's on my iPhone. I don't need to make sure that the app is open. It just works. But just like with Apple Notes, I've started realizing, well, I'd just rather have like a single list of reminders and then use hashtags to organize those tasks, because they're easier to input, they're easier to dictate, and I just prefer sort of creating these multiple smart lists and filters that filter out the same list of reminders rather than having to navigate back and forth between multiple separate lists. And so that's what I do. I have a single reminders list where I drop everything. And at a very high level, reminders can be hashtag work and hashtag home. And then from there, if they are work ones, they have some, I call them sub tags, like additional tags like iOS review or club for club stuff, or articles for Mac Story stuff, and so forth. And so something else that I've started doing is, well, I realized when I'm using the Apple Watch and I'm just dictating something like, remind me to do such and such at, 9 p.m. Now that task has a due date, but doesn't have a hashtag, doesn't have a tag.
Right.
So, for example, I created a smart list in reminders that I review on a regular basis that is called dated but untagged. And that allows me to see the reminders that I've scheduled but don't have any tags. And most likely those reminders I've created from my Apple Watch. And so they're like, it's almost like an inbox of reminders that are created but not organized yet. And so reviewing that filter on a regular basis allows me to stay organized. And smart lists in reminders, the final thing I will say, they're great because they basically behave just like regular lists in that you can create sections inside of a smart list, and you can organize those sections vertically or like a Kanban board as columns. And so that's what I've done with the project for the iOS review. Under the hood, they're all tasks in the same reminders list, but because they're tagged and because they're organized in sections, when you open my iOS review smart list in reminders, it's all neatly organized. It looks like a project, but it's actually just a filter.
Yeah. Very interesting. I like that. I like that approach a lot. I think that's one of the things that solves a problem that I think I've had with reminders in the past, which is when I have a lot of reminders can be a very long, intimidating list that's not very well not very well organized. It's just a list. But with those kind of filters and subsections and everything, you can really you can do a lot of the organization stuff that maybe things would handles better out of the box. I think the other things that I like too is like, for as you were talking about, like when you have multiple lists, there are keyboard shortcuts for everything. So when I'm working, I can easily just take something and move it to my Mac Stories list by hitting a keyboard shortcut and typing a couple of characters, and boom, it's in there automatically. But all right, Federico, we should talk about RSS, which is probably one of our longest running favorite topics on App Stories, going back 401 episodes now. But let's, I've always gravitated back to Reader. And I think what always takes me back to Reader, and I've tried lots and lots of apps, is the simplicity of the app and the speed with which I can go through headlines, because I don't do a lot of reading in Reader itself. I mostly scan things, I dump it out to the browser, or I shoot it off to a Read Later app. So for me, Reader is about speed and sending things somewhere else. And the design is so nice and clean that it makes it very easy to parse headlines and snippets of summaries of articles very quickly, so I can go through. And I keep it, I'm rethinking right now my organization of RSS, because one of the things I have two main, I guess you would call them, work type categories. One is Apple and one is general tech, which is kind of like everything else that's not necessarily about Apple. But I also have one for music, which is just more of a personal reading thing, and games, which is quasi NPC related, but also just personal. And I don't find myself getting into the music and the games one as much as often as I would like. So I have to kind of rethink those. But the other two categories I go through very regularly, and we'll get to talking about Read Later apps later. But one of the things that I've been doing in Reader is, when I find something that, it's hard to define this. There are certain things that I know I definitely want to read this. I'll dump it out to the browser. I want to read it right away. There are things, I'm going to read this late. I definitely want to read this later. Okay, I'll send it to a Read Later app. But then there are things that catch my eye that I think, this might be interesting, but I'm not really sure, is really what it comes down to. And I will star them, because when I star them, I use Feedbin as my back-end sync service. And what Feedbin does is it creates a separate RSS feed of starred items, which I then feed directly into the RSS tracking of my Read Later app. That way, periodically, I can go through that list and kind of look at those things. And, it turns out that a lot of it is junk that I didn't really want to read, wasn't really that important, wasn't really something that would lead to some article or anything, and I'll just get rid of it. But at least it's not clogging up my main inbox in my Read Later app, and it's not on my mind anymore. And I can kind of, when I have a little more time, sit down and go through those things without trying to find them again through the sea of all the other headlines that I get through RSS every day.
Okay. So I, just like you gravitate toward Reader, I gravitate toward Lear. That's Lire. I really like it. I've been using it for like past couple of years, and it's very plain looking, like very iOS native looking. It's got a great text parser. Like I don't spend a lot of time reading inside Lear, and it's mostly a place to catch up on the headlines and quickly triage them. I love Lear because of the integration with Read Later services, and specifically, we're going to talk about this in part 2 of this episode, but it's got a Readwise reader integration that uses the Readwise API, so that when I press the button in Lear, it saves the article directly to the service without showing any share sheet, any extension. Like it just saves it immediately.
And that's the reason why I may, especially with Reader coming out with a new version that we've talked about in the past, and I assume that the existing Reader 5 is going to go away at some point or not be as developed as often, that I will be eventually looking for another RSS client.
The new reader is very opinionated. I think we'll talk about this when the app comes out. I'll just say this. I'm very curious to see what the public reaction to it will be. And I think there's a world in which Silvio Rizzi will have to keep maintaining 2 apps for a while, because the new reader is drastically different from Reader 4.
Right. Yeah, I'm not suggesting anything negative about the new reader. What I'm suggesting is that it's just
a different experience. Like it's
a very
different.
It's a very different app that I don't think is very well suited to the way you and I read RSS.
Yes.
And so that's why I may be in the market for a new RSS client eventually. And the idea of Lear and having direct integration with Readwise Reader is appealing primarily because a lot of what I just described when I say I dump an article out to Safari, I do that so that I can get it to Readwise Reader oftentimes. And that's just a bunch of extra steps that you don't have to do.
Yeah, Lear is great because like I said, it's very native. And so everything is customizable, very much in line with the iOS 18 style of customizing everything. You long press on a headline and you get a preview of the article, but also a context menu with actions that you can customize. Everything you can sort of fine tune to your liking. It's fast. It can optionally extract all text from truncated feeds. I use it with InnoReader. That is my RSS syncing service of choice, but I use it before with Fitbin. It's equally great. And yeah, that's my usage is like let me see so I have these folders: Apple, Games, Handhelds, Other, which is like indie bloggers, Tech, and YouTube. I don't know why I'm still using the YouTube integration in InnoReader. I should probably get rid of this folder. But yeah, I love scanning my headlines by folder. And I just like to dip into the Games folder, for example, see what's new, and then just mark that folder as read and then move on. And there's also like something that I appreciate. There's a Today view that just shows you articles from the current day. So if you haven't caught up on your RSS in a few days and you just want to see, okay, I want to declare bankruptcy on everything else, but just let me see what's new today, you can do it because there's a Today view. And there's even a Calm Feeds view that just shows you articles from websites that posting frequently. Like for example, Club Mac Stories that posts a new newsletter once a week. That's a Calm feed by default. But the frequency of Calm feeds you can also customize in settings. So what I'm saying is, if you like the idea of a native look for an RSS client that is highly customizable, sort of like a modern generation NetNewsWire in a way, this is the app for you, Lear.
Yeah, no, it is a really nice app, and I have used it on and off over the years, and maybe I'll take another look at it. I think you've maybe convinced me to at least give it another shot.
I can be very convincing.
You can be, and look, it's been. I like to move around and try these apps. I rotate them pretty frequently, and it's been a while since I've rotated RSS feed apps. And another one I like a lot is ReadKit. I think that has a great UI with a lot of nice swipe gestures and other things built into it. But Lear has that added advantage of some great automation too. So yeah, that's a cool app. All right, Federico, as you said, we are going to do a part 2 of this because there are some other categories of apps that we want to talk about, and we're probably going to go into some depth on them. So, and one of those is going to be read later apps. So we will get back to that next week. But for now, I want to thank our sponsor for this episode. That is Sentry. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. We're both on Mastodon too. Just go to fetici.macstories.net and johnvorhees.macstories.net to follow us there. And Federico's on Instagram and Threads, where he's at Fetici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.